Imagine two players at a chessboard. One is stronger, he has positioned his pieces better, he has more material, and he controls the center. Anyone looking at the board would say, look, 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 he's winning. Now add one detail. The strong player's clock is running out, not his opponent's, but his. Every minute he spends thinking doesn't just take away his time, it takes away part of his advantage. And the longer he thinks about the perfect move, the weaker his position becomes. And for the second player, the weaker one, the clock ticks slowly. He's losing in terms of pieces, but time is on his side. This is actually Iran and the United States of America. Right now, these very days, I've tried to talk about this in different ways several times, but judging by the questions people ask during my live broadcasts, so to speak, in real time, as they say. Yes, both in the questions and directly, this clearly shows that there's a lack of attention here. So who in fact is winning? Well, let's talk now about who in fact is winning. Today I'll try to explain something that almost no news channel explains. So why is the strongest power on the planet negotiating as if it's the one in urgent need and not Tehran, which is cornered? Closer to the middle, I'll show you one fact about Iran's nuclear program that honestly gave me chills. 99% of the work is already done, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Let's go step by step because everything only becomes clear when you go step by step. After several months of war, a war in which both sides exchanged blows, the moment came when negotiators from the US and Iran reached a kind of, as both sides say, preliminary agreement. On paper, it looks approximately like this. Extend the truce for 60 days, well, to talk things over. But that means lifting the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz and starting, sort of, to talk about Iran's nuclear program. That is, the narrowest strip of water itself, through which, as we've said many times, a fifth of the world's oil passes. They announced this yesterday. Yesterday, Thursday, it seemed like, well, here it is, the beginning of the end of the war. But already on Friday, President Trump put forward some new demands on Hormuz and on other points as well. And according to him, he went to the Situation Room. Guys, he could have easily filmed this in his Oval Office or at Mar-a-Lago or somewhere else. But no, he went to the Situation Room, and he emphasized several times that he would make the final decision. Well, you kind of have to immediately pick up on the hint here. From Tehran's side, we'll talk about this. The official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs literally said the following. Contact is being maintained, but the memorandum, not an agreement, a memorandum has not been finalized yet. And most importantly, there is no confirmation that Iran's highest authority approves any of this. What does that mean in plain language? They agreed but didn't sign, and at the last moment new conditions appeared, and this is where most viewers draw the obvious conclusion. Oh, I see, it's Tehran, so they're dragging things out? And someone else says, no, it's Trump dodging again, right? Both are only half or even a quarter true, but the whole truth, I would say, is much more interesting. The truth is always more interesting than fiction, actually, because right now we're not going to figure out who's bad or who's good, but rather the mechanics, that very hidden part, which, well, actually the puppets move because the hidden part moves them like this. Yes, that's how this whole game really works. And when you understand the mechanics, you'll be able to predict the news a week before it's announced. Let's agree on one principle right away. I won't pretend that both sides are right in their own way. That's not science, that's a polite evasion of thought. Where one position is stronger, I'll say it's stronger. Where someone has their hands tied, I'll say exactly what is tying their hands. Balance. For the sake of balance, that's not objectivity, that's cowardice. We're doing something different here. Thank God we're not members of some body that has to answer to someone, right? So let's start with Tehran. Because strangely enough, its position is easier to understand. Iran enters these negotiations from a position of weakness. And that's not an opinion, it's a fact. Well, let's confirm this fact. The economy is in crisis. Fact. A crisis that began even before the end of the war, gentlemen, under sanctions, and the war only made it worse. The infrastructure is damaged, that's already the war, by strikes. Money is frozen abroad, that was even before. Yes, billions of dollars, by the way, that the regime can't get to. It's their money, but they can't reach it. So what does Iran want? Yes, it's very specific. First, unfreezing the assets. Give us our money. The Iranian delegation has already stated that it managed to include in the memorandum the unblocking of about half of the frozen funds. That's $6 billion. So, in total, we're talking about $12 billion. Money is oxygen for the regime. Now, the second thing they want, the lifting of the American blockade of the Strait of Hormuz so they can regain freedom of navigation and, most importantly, exports. That's what concerns them. Freedom of navigation. No, they're concerned about exports. The third thing is the key to everything. Iran wants to keep its nuclear card, the nuclear card, for as long as possible. They understand that this is their most important card. They looked at Ukraine, they looked at everything else. They know exactly why no one touches North Korea and so on. The nuclear card for as long as possible. Keep it close to the chest. Now it gets tricky, right? The Iranians say nuclear issues, they will discuss them after they cement the first phase of the deal. That is, well, money and Hormuz. In other words, first give us oxygen, and as for the rest, well, what is most valuable to you, we'll talk about that later. Maybe. Well, that's a classic Eastern tactic. It's 2,000 or 3,000 years old, I suspect. Agree on a general framework, get tangible concessions up front. It's very important, up front. And then at the final stage, well, wait a second, what about this? And then drag it out, drag it out, drag it out. Use the other side's readiness to make a deal as leverage against them. And here comes a tempting thought, which I've even been asked about, right? If the Iranians are interested in dragging things out, then he'll drag it out endlessly, right? Until Trump gives him everything he wants. Remember this thought. In a few minutes, we'll come back to it, and I'll show you why it contains a hidden mistake. This mistake could cost Tehran quite a lot. But first, the other side of the board. The board has two sides. What does Trump want? At first glance, the same thing any negotiator wants, a good deal. He put it very clearly himself. The deal has to benefit the United States. Otherwise, why should we get involved at all, right? But that phrase comes from a position of strength. Let's honestly list what this strength of ours actually is. First, America controls both of Iran's main levers at the same time. I think we talked about this yesterday or the day before. Lever number one is oil exports, which are hit by sanctions. Notice a characteristic detail. Even at the very moment when the preliminary deal was announced, the U.S. Treasury Department quietly and calmly announced that it had imposed new sanctions against the oil division of the Iranian military. Well, you know, they have the IRGC. They have their own structures there, almost like an empire of their own, right? So, with one hand, as they say, we reach out, and with the other, we quietly tighten the noose just a little bit. This is the message. Guys, any delay will cost you dearly. The second lever is the military presence near the Strait of Hormuz, that very strait, which is the main point of leverage, the way to threaten the whole world, and so on. Right now, this strait is under the control of the American fleet. You could say that Iran controls it, but Iran is just sitting there, while the Americans came and said, no, not just you, us too. So let's sum up the interim results. So, interim hot, as Yoska used to say, who was the owner of the Georgian restaurant where I worked, and I worked there as a waiter, when he served, the appetizers, and then the main course would come. And before that, well, in Georgian, in the real way, Yoskeli, I don't remember exactly what his Georgian Jewish last name was, he would come out of the kitchen holding a dish and shout, intermediate hot dish. So that's it, the intermediate hot dish. At the moment, right now, Trump has the stronger hand. Iran is bargaining its way out of the crisis. I don't know how else to put it. America is bargaining while holding both of the opponent's main cards, and Iran isn't holding anything of ours at the moment, right? If the game were decided right now in one move, well, Washington would win. No way around it, so to speak, right? But the game isn't decided in one move. And this is where what we talked about comes into play, the ticking clock. Now I'm going to say something that at first glance sounds like a complete contradiction to everything I just said. Well, please, if you catch me in this contradiction, that's great. It means you were thinking while I was talking. Well, I'll resolve this contradiction, so please don't worry. No need to worry. Many people say, there was a contradiction here. But if you listened until the end, you wouldn't think so. Here is the contradiction. Trump has a strong position but little time, while Iran has a weak position but a lot of time. I say they have a lot of time, and at the same time I say Iran has no time. Listen, right? How is that possible? How can it be that the strongest player is more limited in time than the weaker one? Because there are two completely different ways of counting time, two different countdowns. Of course, there is only one time if it exists at all. Physicists say it doesn't exist, but we won't go deep into physics right now. We won't. So I'll put it very unscientifically. There are two completely different kinds of time, and people always confuse them. And when we stop confusing them, we'll start to understand this war better than 90% of the experts. They're the so-called experts on television. The first type of time refers to negotiation leverage, who is stronger at the table at any given moment. Here, as we found out, Trump is stronger. The second type is endurance over time, who can withstand the current situation longer, the state of neither war nor peace, right? Neither one thing nor the other. This is where everything turns upside down. Because maintaining the pressure costs America a lot, every week. Keeping two carrier groups and a reinforced presence near Hormuz costs an enormous amount of money. In a way, it's wear and tear on the fleet, it's the consumption of expensive munitions, it's crew fatigue. And that's considering that we can't afford to divert forces from the Pacific, where America's main real strategic adversary is China. No matter what agreements we might reach with them over there, that's the only real strategic adversary of America. Every week near the Iranian coast is a week that the American fleet isn't where it's truly needed. I'm not saying it's needed there to shoot. The fleet doesn't just perform those functions. And what about Iran? Iran, on the other hand, is just waiting it out and isn't spending anything on the same scale. On the contrary, it's restoring damaged infrastructure, and it's keeping its nuclear card untouched. I'll tell you something about the nuclear card at the end that you won't really like. Now let's put both pictures together. Well, in the end there will be something you'll like, but along the way, something you won't like very much. Let's put the pictures together. The contradiction will disappear. Trump is stronger, but his strength fades over time. The Iranian side is losing strength too, but more slowly. You understand, right? Losing strength more slowly. So if Trump has weeks, then Iran apparently has months. So Trump has the advantage. But the advantage is perishable, short-lived. It's like fresh fish in the heat. It immediately starts to go off, right? Today it's there, but in a few weeks, well, it's become second freshness. There will be much less of it. That's where the logic of the moment comes from. You understand? Now, why does the stronger side behave as if it's the one in a hurry? Trump needs to turn today's advantage into a signed deal quickly before the curves intersect. And Iran, on the contrary, is interested in dragging things out because each week narrows the gap in their favor. That's why Iran's last-minute new demands are a delaying tactic. And those same new demands from Trump are an attempt to force things to push through while he's still on top. It's the same tactic, but with completely opposite goals. I really hope I haven't confused you, gentlemen. We haven't reached the most interesting part yet. I promised I'd get to that 99% point, and we're almost there. Let's go back to the idea I asked you to remember. If Iran is interested in dragging things out, they'll keep it going until Trump gives them everything, right? It sounds solid, but there's one assumption hidden in there, and that assumption is false. Here's the assumption. Trump has only two options. Either sign the deal on Iran's terms or keep waiting and enduring, losing resources. And if the choice is between these two, then yes, whoever holds out longer wins and supposedly Iran will last. But Trump also has a third option. And it's exactly this that turns the entire Iranian strategy upside down. The third move or option. It's not about passively sitting and waiting until my strength runs out, but about changing the rules of the game to make delay unbearably costly for Iran. And so it should be to the point where the blood would flow out so much that the benefit from dragging things out wouldn't have time to build up. How is this done? Well, there are two ways. In fact, believe me, the American side uses both methods. The first method, escalation. Instead of waiting. We don't just sit and wait until we reach an agreement, right? Delaying is beneficial for Iran as long as the current situation remains stable. Well, anything valuable that Iran is holding on to won't go anywhere while they're stalling, right? But Trump isn't obligated to agree to this stability. As long as he still has a strong hand, he can choose not to tolerate it, but to act. Well, I mean, let's say the club is just lying there, right? If it's there, then in the second act it has to be used. And then Iran's clock starts ticking much faster. Protecting something that can be taken while you guard it is pointless. You get the idea, right? You try to protect it, but it's already been ruined. So why the hell did I bother protecting it at all? Well, and of course, there's also the second way, strangulation through sanctions. Those very same new sanctions, but the oil sector is the message. The message. Hey guys, did you hear that? Got it, right? Iran is hanging on in anything but a neutral, calm environment. It's hanging on in an environment that gets worse every week. Every week without a deal isn't about keeping the status quo. It's another turn of the screw on the economy, and then another, and then another. That's when you begin to wheeze and suffocate. There's a third factor, probably the deepest one. It's called the asymmetry of stakes. Again, I hope this doesn't sound too complicated. Think about what each side is risking. What is Trump risking? He's risking time and money. Well, and also that his party might not be chosen to lead Congress, right? What about him? He keeps his life, his money, his family, everything. It's the same for everyone else, right? A lot remains, but nothing tragic. And what is the Iranian regime risking? Gentlemen, the regime is risking itself. Its own existence. And when we say the word regime, it doesn't just mean that. It means the life of each one of them. If the pressure squeezes the economy to the point where the people become enraged, the history of this regime shows how close it has come to that edge several times already. So, dragging things out turns from a smart tactic into a coin toss. Maybe I won't get killed. Well, there's a 50-50 chance of that. That's Tehran's pain threshold. It's lower than its bluster makes it seem. But they understand that. That's why the conclusion that Iran will just wait until Trump surrenders is only true in an imaginary world where Trump is completely tied up. In real life, in the real world, he has a third option. And that's the real crossroads right now. It's not about who endures the longest, or who can endure longer, right? Here's the real turning point. Who will give in first, Iran under sanctions or Trump under threat? That is, who will break first, or as Americans say, who will blink? That's exactly what Trump's phrase means. The final decision will be made in the Situation Room. Because decisions aren't made in the Oval Office, you have to go down to the Situation Room. Sit down with all the people who are usually there and say, guys, let's go. What options do we have? Put everything on the table. And now here's a fact that explains why this whole game is played with such nervousness, I would say such anxiety. When people talk about Iran's nuclear program, they usually repeat the phrase, Iran has only a short technical step left from 60% enrichment to weapons-grade 90%. I've said this many times myself, and it's true, right? But this phrase doesn't convey the real scale of what's happening. Experts measure Iran's enrichment work in units called separative work units. I won't bore you with physics. The proportion is what matters. So, to bring Iran's entire current stockpile of 60% enriched uranium up to the terrifying 90% level, you need to do about, are you ready? 1% of the work that's already been done to accumulate it. You heard that right. 1%, they've already done 99%. 99% of the way is already completed. When journalists say a short technical step, the public imagines that there's just a small part of the journey left to go. No, 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 no. In reality, it's at the finish line. 99 steps out of 100 have been taken. Well, 100. If you were running a 100-meter dash, you've run 99 meters. There's 1 meter left. One more number, ladies and gentlemen, so you can feel the weight. According to international inspectors' estimates, Iran has accumulated about 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% or thereabouts. Yes, they don't know for sure. By their own definitions, by the way, it could just as well be 627. Also, but by their definitions, there is a theoretical possibility to create more than one nuclear device. Because for one, you need about 40, 41, 42, 39, I don't know exactly. Divide one by the other, 440 divided by 40, right? So, this stockpile is enough for more than one bomb. According to the estimates of the head of the department, potentially for, as they said, 10 or 11. That's it. For some reason, the press mentions 10. Well, I think it's just for a round number. They have enriched uranium, exactly enough for those 12 long-range missiles that Ukraine sold, transferred to an Islamic state capable of flying 3,000 kilometers. Congratulations, and here's the most alarming part. For more than 8 months now, international inspectors have had no access to Iran's stockpiles. And before that, they were only allowed to go where Iran wanted them to go. The cameras are turned off, inspectors are not allowed in. In other words, the world simply doesn't know. Yes, no one knows anything. The world is blind. It doesn't see what's happening beyond that line right now. Now you understand why both sides are so nervous about the clock, why Trump is rushing while he's strong, why he can't let Iran stall, because Iran wins by stalling. This isn't just an abstract weak, this is the final percent. On the way to a weapon that will change the entire balance of power in the region. That's what's really ticking on that clock. And before we move on to what all this is most likely going to end with, and I have a very specific forecast for you regarding the timing, stay with me for another minute, because there's one counterintuitive, well, there's intuitive, and then there's counterintuitive, point about NEVs that turns the idea of why you can and cannot strike in this conflict upside down, and it perfectly shows just how subtle the game really is. Not like you just go there, smash everything, or why the hell do we even need them there, or X all the bastards and so on. It would seem if Trump is stronger and wants to pressure the regime, then what's stopping him from just striking until the regime breaks, right? There's something subtle that gets in the way, but it's an elegant trap. Here it is. The main pressure point of the global economy in this conflict is the price of oil. Any strike on Iranian oil exports immediately raises the global price. It goes up. And a high price at the gas pump is, by the way, something the American voter sees with his own eyes every day. This is politically toxic for everything else. But it gets more interesting. If Iran sees its oil being targeted, it will have both the reason and the logic to strike back at its neighbors' oil fields, like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. This is no longer a local conflict, it's a Middle East-wide blaze and a collapse of the global economy. And here comes a paradox, which I think is the most beautiful thing in this whole story. Beautiful. Maybe fascinating isn't the right word, I don't know. To put pressure on the regime, you actually can't touch Iranian oil. Not beautiful, probably elegant? Yes, Iranian oil and oil infrastructure serve not as a target, but as a hostage. Think about that. As long as it remains intact, Iran has something to lose. That's exactly why. That's why Iran itself doesn't strike its neighbors, because it knows that the response will hit its own oil fields. Oil, untouched on both sides, is a mutual hostage that keeps the whole conflict from expanding. Well, kind of like the nuclear bombs between the Soviet Union and America. That's where all the cunning of the pressure strategy comes from. If you're going to put pressure on the regime, you have to hit the points that hurt the regime itself. The power structure, its finances, its ability to control its own population. But not because it will drive up the global oil price or give Iran a reason to set the Gulf on fire. Let me put it this way. It's like a principle to remember, right? The strongest weapon against the regime is actually not touching the oil and turning it into a hostage. Well, as we've always said, the scariest thing is the hammer hanging over your head before it strikes, not after. Leave it intact, well, the oil, so that there's something to lose. It sounds paradoxical, but that's exactly how truly smart pressure strategies work. They leave the opponent a way out that's less costly for them than catastrophe once it has already happened. Already happened. Now, the promised forecast, where the real time limit for Trump lies. I'm convinced that this limit isn't the November elections, as he likes to repeat. It's much closer. And it's determined by the intersection, well, I think, of three curves. The first curve is military capacity. The fleet, ammunition, and crews, the constant diversion of forces from China. This window is, well, I don't know, a week and a half, 2 months. Let's say 2 months. That's it. The second curve is the patience of the oil market. The market must not believe that the crisis at Hormuz will last for a long time. Otherwise, the fuel price will start rising on its own. From one uncertainty to another, this will put pressure on Trump not in a year, but in the coming weeks. Not even 2 months anymore, even less now. The third curve is the unity of the coalition. Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf countries are ready to tolerate instability for a limited time. The longer this state of neither war nor peace continues, the more their interests diverge and the harder it is to maintain a united front. Add up all three of these curves. You will get, in my opinion, a window of 6 weeks at most. Yes, I think so, 6 weeks at most. I've always said that the optimal time for us is at the end of May, the last day of May, so to speak, to finish all this. It's not very optimal, but it's acceptable until June 15. But, so to speak, now 6 weeks, I think that's already cutting it very close. This is the real Trump deadline. After this window, his strong hand starts to weaken faster than Iran's, and then new demands at the last moment won't work anymore, because Tehran will have a reason to wait, not to give in. For now, we can criticize them for rocking the very boat I just told you about. That's why, if there's going to be a deal, logically it should be closed within this window. Delaying it would be against America, against Trump, not against us. And apparently, everyone in the U.S. understands this perfectly well. That's why the final decision is being made now, and not waiting until the fall. Because if we weren't too concerned about this, we would have said, let's wait until the fall, and would have continued striking Iran. And now here's the reason we're analyzing this chess game in the first place. You could look at all this and fall into despair. War, uranium nearing the finish line, blinded inspectors, burning clocks. It seems like the world is balancing on a knife's edge. But let's look at it differently. What did we really see today? We saw that even the most closed-off, most aggressive regime is eventually forced to come to the table, not out of kindness, because of the pressure of reality, an economy that can't be deceived, a price you can't dictate, time that can't be forced or canceled by decree. All these forces together drive even a dictatorship into situations where it has to negotiate, not dictate. And here is the main lesson. It's called by the name of the science I belong to, the science of freedom. Tyranny always seems all-powerful from the inside. From the outside, under the pressure of the free world and the pressure of economic laws that do not obey decrees, it turns out to be much more fragile than it appears. Regimes built on coercion are always at war with reality, and reality doesn't lose. It's patient, like those very slow clocks. History knows dozens of cases when it seemed that evil was about to win, but then it collapsed because it was built against human nature and against economic laws. There are such cases too. Freedom and common sense are slow forces, but they are enduring. Their clocks run in the right direction, so don't despair when you see alarming news. Alarming news comes all the time, non-stop, one after another, right? Learn to read the mechanics behind them. When you start to understand how it works, fear gives way to clarity, and that's already half the victory. If this analysis helped you see behind the chaos, of news, messages, deceptions, some kind of logic, right? And I really hope that I'm helping you in this sense, ladies and gentlemen. Please do 3 things. First, leave a like. It really helps the channel reach new viewers, basically get past the algorithm. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next analyses. By the way, the bell is actually very important as it turns out. Some kind of percentage is calculated there. In general, the algorithm really needs this, really wants it. So please do the algorithm a favor, click the bell. Then there'll be a lot of interesting things waiting for you. And write in the comments which of the 2 scenarios you think is more likely. Will Trump push through the deal, or will Iran push through the deal? By the way, I'm curious how you see this, well, let's say chessboard. And for those who want to go deeper, we have our paid channel. $4 a month. You get early access to analyses before they're published and additional materials that aren't available to the public. This is the best way to support the channel and, as they say, stay one step ahead of the news. And of course, for everyone who wants to learn how to analyze tough situations themselves, there's my book, Capitalism 101. It only gives a general, overall perspective, a kind of introduction to understanding, and then there's the course Roadmap to Freedom. These are the tools for this kind of thinking on a separate channel, which is also called Roadmap to Freedom. So you start there. There are 2 options. 10-minute sessions every morning, just to give you a quick dose of interesting ideas and something to think about. Or there are, I think, 17 chapters each, about an hour long. If I'm not mistaken, maybe 16, maybe 18. By the way, I should check that. And then, when you have time, you can, so to speak, listen to it, right? And so it gives you a tool. And why do you need a roadmap to thinking? Because it simply gives you tools for this kind of thinking. Learn to see the mechanics. Learn to distinguish between fact and theory. Learn, so to speak, as they say, to read the other player's clock. Or from the side, I don't know, well, in general, your clock, my clock, I press, you press. Learn to read his clock. Because freedom doesn't start on the barricades, it starts in your mind. Only in your mind. In the minds of those people who know how to think clearly. Right. And I would like to add sort of something to what we were talking about. Because some of the things we've understood and learned during these, let's say, 2 months of the active phase of the war. With Iran, I mean, yes. So something started to become clearer to us about what's happening. They were removed with the best bombs, the very best that humanity has. By best, I mean the most destructive, the most self-destructive. So to gnaw through dozens of meters of rock to get to what's below, the whole world waited for morning to see a crater where the Iranian nuclear program used to be. And in the morning, gentlemen, it turned out that almost everything survived. Of dozens of underground facilities, nearly all remain intact. Missiles, factories, centrifuges survived what was supposed to turn them into dust. And now you are faced with a fact that actually changes the whole picture. The program was not destroyed. They only managed to get a part of the program. And that's good, but only partially. Stop for a second and think. What did we think? We thought we bombed them, but really we kept hitting without reaching them. We reached some of them, but most of them we didn't. Iran wasn't building factories. Iran was building a mountain, or mountains over the factories, burying its powers so deep that the most precise bomb on the planet hits rock before it reaches the target. And this mountain is made exactly for that, and does exactly what it was designed for. It took the hit and withstood it. That means the problem can't be solved from the air. No matter how many bombs you drop, the last percent remains below, safe and sound under the rock. That very percent, after which Tehran steps up to the microphone and says out loud the same thing it repeats every day. Israel will be gone, America will be gone, we will bomb everyone. As soon as we get the weapon, we will bomb them all, everyone will die, and so on. And here for us, for those who wanted to solve everything with a single airstrike, there are still a few doors left to open if we want to get this situation under control, right? Let's see where each one leads. So, door number 1, strike again and again. turning a single blow into a never-ending war. Well, I don't know if we have enough missiles for that. Every airstrike means the Strait of Hormuz starts trembling again. The sudden jump in gas prices at your station is the bill you pay. So, as they say, everything we throw to break these mountains, but the mountain most likely still stands anyway. The second door, what can't be solved from the air. So, special operations, sabotage, people on the inside, well, that's no longer just a raid, as they say. That's a different kind of war, and it's paid for with people, our people. The third door, to sit down and negotiate with whom? With those who promised to wipe us out, and now know for sure that their underground cities have survived. These are negotiations where the trump card, so to speak, he thinks, is on his side of the table. That is, I don't know about the trump card, but at least he knows, or rather, he thinks that he's invulnerable. You sit down to ask him for something that, from his point of view, he hasn't given up, and you can't give it up either. Notice that among these doors there is no push-button victory. No, everything is under control. These are the words they tell you. I mean, of course words are spoken, but there isn't a single door like that, right? Here, and I'll open one more door, the only one that truly shuts the program down. What you will hear next turns logic upside down. Here's a thought, one that for some reason isn't spoken out loud today. You can bomb concrete, you can bomb metal, you can collapse a tunnel, but there is one thing that no bomb in the world can reach. And it's exactly that which holds up the whole mountain above it. That thing is called a regime. You can rebuild a centrifuge, you can dig a tunnel again. But as long as those in power want this weapon, no crater will solve anything. They'll dig in even deeper, build further, hide better. Because the real bunker of the Iranian bomb isn't the rock under Fordo, it's the people. People who want this rock. And now a simple question that turns everything upside down. If the bomb doesn't kill the regime, what will? Remove, kill, it doesn't matter, right? Open any textbook, run your finger through it, and see how regimes have fallen. Not a single one has collapsed because it was bombed from the outside. They collapsed from within, under their own weight. When the people who had been silent for years suddenly stopped being afraid one day. We've all seen this before. The squares of Tehran, women without headscarves, young people who grew up not on hatred for America, but on the forbidden internet. Just like in the Soviet Union, people listened to foreign broadcasts, and the desire to simply live. These people go out and pay a price for it that you, or rather we, could never even imagine. They are the only force that can remove the mountain along with those who piled it up. And here is the bitter truth that your libertarian host senses. Freedom cannot be dropped from an airplane. It cannot be given by a foreign army, brought in on armor, or written into someone else's memorandum. A people who have been handed freedom from the outside will not keep it even for a week. Freedom lasts only when people have taken it themselves, by their own will, by their own choice, at their own cost. And even then, they mostly end up putting in a new, I don't even know what to call it exactly, monster. All right. So the only way forward for Iran without a bomb is from within, by Iranians themselves. Well, so what do you say? Are you just going to watch and wait, sit around? No. But the role isn't what they're selling you. Not to overthrow them, we can't do that from the outside. I mean, theoretically we could, with armies all over the world and so on, but we can't. We shouldn't feed the regime with money and deals that prolong their life. We shouldn't give them that external enemy they've been using for 40 years to justify every noose on their own streets. Every bomb you use to threaten Iranians is an argument for the Ayatollahs. Sorry, they want to destroy us, so we want to destroy them. And every time you speak not with the regime but with the Iranian people themselves, you take this tool out of their hands, this argument. Our task is not to take away their freedom under the guise of help, and Israel must not give the regime the very gift it keeps its finger on the button for. And now, the bigger picture. Any country that watched as the best bombs on the planet crashed into a mountain has already drawn its conclusion and written it down. If you want a weapon they won't let you have, bury it deeper than a bomb can reach. Do you want to stay in power? Bury your weapon deeper than a bomb can reach. Today you're a tiger, tomorrow you're prey. That's why this concerns all of us. Not just because the missile can reach anywhere, though it really can, but because a world where a nuclear program can't be checked, bombed, or bought out, in the end relies on just one thing, on whether the people will choose freedom themselves. And is there any light in this difficult story? Yes, there is. Here it is. A bomb can be buried, but a person who has once stopped being afraid cannot. The bet isn't on the plane, but on that Iranian who will return to the square tomorrow morning. And it is him we must help with all our strength. How can we help? That's probably a separate question, and personally, neither you nor I can help, but I think our governments can. If this conversation isn't just background noise for you, but something you actually think about, I have a separate channel for thinkers. I've already mentioned it. It's called Roadmap to Freedom. There you get to the very root, slowly and thoroughly. The link is below the video. Separate comments. On the main channel, on my analytical channel, and here, on the main channel, on my analytical channel, see you tomorrow.